Good question from Old Crispy Boy on Instagram. Could you give a general percentage for a good American stout recipe? When I put the call out for questions today, and it was last minute. I was trying to figure out when I can fit everything in, and it was a little bit last minute. But I asked specifically, like, if there's style questions, recipe questions. The first thing I would suggest is I would suggest getting your copy of Brewing Classic Styles. Mine is well worn, semi falling apart, and does it have maybe I got the autograph. I do not have the autographed copy of the book by Jamil and John Palmer. But this is a book that you must have in your library from a recipe formulation standpoint. Probably with the exception of like a more modern take on IPA, some sour beers, and maybe a couple other things, you can essentially pull any historical style, use the recipe in here or scale up the recipe in here, and you're going to be really damn close to what you're looking for. I still use it as a frame of reference. And so I'm going to answer 2 stout questions tonight. And the second one that I answer is going to sound a little funny after I answer this one. But could you give a general percentage for a good American stout recipe? When I think American stout, I think of Sierra Nevada, the stout, that American stout that they do. I don't know if it's as high ABV, but I do kind of think about like that 7% type stout. I forget what the stout was from Rogue, but I believe Rogue had like kind of that 7% American stout, maybe in that the 22-ounce bottle. Remember 22-ounce bottles? That used to be a thing. I don't think there's so much a thing anymore. But you probably want to be pushing a beer like that original gravity, at least up to about high 1060s, low 1070s. Kind of planning on the finishing gravity being in the mid to high teens. So, 10, 16, 10, 18. There is going to be a direct correlation between how many IBUs you can fit into this beer and that residual sweetness, though. If you're looking at the style guideline and you're going at the lower end of the residual sweetness, you're making a drier beer, I would encourage you to take the bitterness back to the lower end of the style spectrum as well. If you're making a beer with a higher residual gravity, I think that you want to be pushing toward the higher end of that spectrum. So since I'm suggesting like a 1017, 1018 beer, maybe look at having kind of 60 up to 70 IBU in that beer, with the supermajority of that coming from like a 60 to like 20-minute edition, but the bulk really coming from your 60-minute edition. I mentioned the hops right there. Maybe get your last 10 IBU from like a 10-minute and under edition to kind of pull a little bit of that late aromatic. So maybe looking at getting, some hops in at 60 and 20, and then maybe some at 10 too. As far as that goes, I like to, in a beer like that, even though it's American stout, I would be really tempted to use one of those gorgeous British grown and malted pale ale malts, whether it be a Maris Otter or something like that. But just something that has something that's like close to 4 Lovibond and has some of that nutty, a hint of toast, but it's just a more robust pale malt character, right? I'd be tempted to use something like that. If you're going to be using just Pilsner, which you could definitely do, or 2-row, I would look at blending in 5 to 10%, 6 to 8 Lovibond Munich, because that's kind of a way that you can push up that type British type character, a little bit more base malt depth in a beer like that, blending in 5 to 10% Munich into your base malt proportion. I would stay away from like the 20 Love Munich. If you look at the Weyermann Munich products, they're like a 6 and an 8 or 7 and a 9, something like that. They're pretty close, but keep it in that 10 Lovabond and under Munich for that. As far as roast malt goes, I would view this in a similar way when we were talking about residual sweetness in the beer. I like to create an arc of flavors. So when I'm using roast malt, I usually like to use a couple. The Brewing Classic Styles might talk about taking like your chocolate malt and splitting it between pale chocolate, which is like a 200 love, and regular chocolate, which can be like 300 to 350 off the top of my head. To be honest, I've used so little roast malt in the last 2 years, I'm not exactly sure on those numbers. But then maybe blend up some chocolate-like malts with some roast barley, different things like that. Those are some good examples. So play with some different roast malts. I would suggest going with roast malts that do have the husk on, because you do want a more robust roast character in American Stout. So I would recommend that. If you feel as if you have more residual sweetness in the beer, maybe push that roasted malt total proportion a little bit up to 12%. Maybe it's going to be a little drier, maybe keep it a little closer to 8%. But that's another one of those balancing factors. I think that a beer like this could also use some crystal malt, probably anywhere from 5 to 10%. And again, I would look at arcing those out, maybe a lower Lovabond crystal and a higher, to kind of create an arc of crystal flavor. Yeah, what else do I have? I say you can go a couple of different directions. These beers are about 7%, so you do need a solid slug of yeast in these beers. Okay, just don't poo-poo those 7% beers, because it's gonna come after you a little bit. You're gonna need a solid pitch of yeast to take care of that. I think you can get away with using British yeast in this as well. If you want to go something really classic, of course, something like Chico American Ale yeast, something like that, something on the cleaner side. And just personal preference for me, I say thump up the carbonation in a beer like this, especially if you are on the sweeter side, you have a little bit higher finishing gravity. Push that carbonation level up to 2.7, 2.8. It'll help create a nice foam stand. It'll also push those aromatics out. If you want to get a little wild, then throw a little dry hop in there. If you're brewing at home, you can throw a few ounces of something in. I personally think you should go classic. American Stout to me just sounds like classic 90s, 2000s, what is old school for me, beer there. So stick with your Cascade, your Centennial, maybe get wild with a little Simcoe in there or something, but maybe put to rest some of those other hop boy hops from today's day and age, or use them and see how they go. My thought is this: there's some flavors that don't go with heavily roasted flavors. If there's a way that you can push up some of that classic Pacific Northwest kind of pithy tangerine orange thing, if you think about it, orange and chocolate go together. So just get your wheels turning in that direction. And that's kind of what I would be doing with American Stout.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you feel as if you got any value out of the video, please like and subscribe. There are also other videos that you can watch. They're gonna maybe be over here or over here. Appreciate you watching.